Okay, folks, it occurred to me the other day that I have been seriously remiss in not answering or not providing the answer for a poll that I put on Twitter about, oh gosh, it's almost been 2 months ago. I put out a poll, a Twitter poll, asking which of the following comic book creators have I not met? I had met three of them, but I had not met one of them. And the challenge was to guess which one it was that I hadn't met. Now, the four comic book creators who I'd put on there, in no particular order, but I'm going to list them out in a particular order that I hope will be more interesting than not. The first of which is Ethan Van Sciver. Ethan Van Sciver, to me, is one of the most popular comic book creators on Twitter today, largely because he's a founder of the movement called Comicsgate, which is basically a let's get back to basics comic book movement. Let's not subscribe to all of the social justice warrior topics and interests that plague mainstream comic books, with a special focus on diversity topics where, it seems like these days everybody is trying to jump on the LGBTQ bandwagon and present these characters that, may be appealing to people who are already in those niches, but for the majority of comic book readers who are probably young teen boys or college age boys, this may not appeal to and may cause you to, as the expression goes, go woke, get broke. And see my previous video, The Creeping Rainbow in Comics, the Social Justice League, for an example of what I'm talking about. Now, so Ethan Van Sciver is the first of the four creators that I put on the list. The next creator who I put on the list is someone who I specifically chose because not only is she on Twitter, which is something that is common to all of these four comic book creators, but also because she's on the anti-Comicsgate side of the spectrum. It's the comic book creator Gail Simone, who is famous for comic books such as The Secret Six, comic books such as she has written on Wonder Woman, she's done Superman. She's a very, very famous female creator, and she actually got into a dispute with Comicsgate a while back, such that she broke ties with the company Dynamite, one of whose creators or founders, or maybe the CEO or publisher, was discovered to be related with some Comicsgate movement issues. She actually broke ties with the company over that. So I kind of wanted to get both Ethan Van Sciver and Gail Simone involved in this poll, just in case maybe I could get them at loggerheads with each other, but that never happened, so oh well. Another of the creators was Todd McFarlane. I got him in largely because I wanted to have someone who was representative of the independent, non-Marvel, non-DC stage. Todd McFarlane was one of the original Image 7 who had broken away from Marvel Comics back in the day and founded Image Comics, which has since gone on to become pretty much one of the number 3 comic book company in the industry. I think probably Dark Horse, and I don't know if Valiant really qualifies as one of the biggest ones, but Dark Horse definitely does, or at least did for a while. But Image is still up there. They're the publisher of titles like The Walking Dead. So Todd McFarlane, of course, is famous for the character Spawn. He grew in fame as he worked on Spider-Man and the Hulk, but then created Spawn as his Image property to run alongside the rest of the Image 7 creators, such as Rob Liefeld and Jim Lee. Jim Lee since going on to become a major player at DC Comics. And the last but not least, I wanted to go for that, here's the brass ring of getting to meet a comic book creator, and that was, of course, Stan Lee. Now, Stan Lee has since passed on, but, he's been around for a while, so the possibility that I might have met him is, it's on the board. So I was interested to see what people would think, with what they know of me, what little they know of me as far as my own comic book interests go, to see who it was they thought that I had not met. And I guess it's because of my own social conservative leanings that they figured that I would not have gone out of my way to meet Gail Simone. Gail Simone was the winner of the Twitter poll. Handily, hands down, she got 50% of the votes. All three of the other candidates, Ethan Van Sciver, Todd McFarlane, and Stan Lee, got 16.7% of the votes. So, does that actually reflect reality? Is Gail Simone the person whom I have not met? Well, as it turns out, no. Now, hopefully you can see this okay. This is a copy of Countdown to Mystery number 8, and if you look at this purple section where we've got Eclipso's thumb, let me bring up my camera just to make sure you can hopefully see this. Yeah, there we go. If you're looking here, this is Gail Simone's signature. So I have, in fact, met Gail Simone. Countdown to Mystery number 8 is an interesting comic in that the original writer on Countdown to Mystery was Steve Gerber, and Steve Gerber is incredibly famous for having written comics such as Howard the Duck, and I believe he did Man-Thing. He was very into these off-the-wall comics, and one of the things that he did for DC was this Countdown to Mystery comic, and he wrote the first 7 issues of it, and or at least the first 7 issues of the Dr. Fate portion, because there's 2 stories in there, Dr. Fate and Eclipso. I don't know if they merged at the end or what, but they show as if they're merged at the end. But he took forward the character of Dr. Fate, and he died of cancer, I believe, or maybe it was cystic fibrosis, one of the two. He died, and it was left up to 4 different DC creators to write an ending to his story. And so instead of just hiring one to write an ending to Steve Gerber's already 7-issue story, they hired 4. They got Mark Waid, Gail Simone, Mark Evanier, and Adam Beechan. So each of those 4 took a crack at finishing the story in the way that they thought it should be finished, having read the original 7 issues. Now, this was a series that I'd read as it came out at the time, and so when the 8th issue came out, and because there's a month in between issues, I really didn't have the wherewithal to judge who actually won this particular contest. But when I went and reread the contents of the series, I read issues 1 through 7 straight through, and then got to read all 4 of the endings that these 4 writers had put together as an homage to Steve Gerber. Clearly, Gail Simone's ending for the story was the one that best fit what he was doing all along. And so I always wanted to have the opportunity to tell her that, and as I met her at this comic book convention where I got the book signed, I did tell her that she won. Her story was the best fit for Steve Gerber's writings, and she then proceeded to tell me a story about Steve Gerber that I unfortunately don't remember. So Gail Simone is in fact not the person who I have not met. Now, let's flip over to the other side. What about Comicsgate founder Ethan Van Sciver? Have I ever met him? Well, the answer is yes, I have. Let's go ahead and bring up the camera and make sure you can see this. This is Ethan Van Sciver's signature from 2014 on Flash Rebirth. I met him at that time. At that time, Comicsgate was not a thing. That had yet to happen, so there was nothing. There was no. If I were to meet him at a comic book convention today, we'd have things to chat about, like the fact that he once called me a dumbass on Twitter, and you can go and see that in my video about another Comicsgate property called I think it's called Gemstone or Gemstar. Go ahead and look up that video called How Similar, in comics, How Similar is Too Similar, where he laid that label on me. But no harm done. It's just a disagreement over what constitutes copyright infringement in the comic book realm. Uh, but yeah, at the time, he was just basically someone who was famous for most famous for Green Lantern Rebirth, which was the series that reintroduced Hal Jordan as the primary Green Lantern of Earth, and under Jeff Johns, and then with Jeff Johns doing Flash Rebirth, which didn't reintroduce Barry Allen so much as update his story for later readers. Um, so that leaves two left. Now, it's between Todd McFarlane and Stan Lee. Now, of course, I put up Stan Lee as being the brass ring of all comic book creators to try and find, was there ever really an opportunity for me to meet him? And let me just go ahead and tell you that yes, there was. I've actually met Stan Lee, not necessarily personally, but only personally on at least one occasion. In 2007, I paid about $500, I want to say, for the opportunity to meet him in a one-on-one session. Well, not really one-on-one. It was a VIP kind of special thing. There were 25 tickets sold to the New York Comic Con in 2007, and basically we got to ask questions and get some items signed by him. Now, that was not the first time that I had met Stan Lee in person, although I didn't interact with him one-on-one except for the Q&A kind of portions. I met him first at a Dallas Comic-Con. He was standing not 5 feet away from me, and I have some very poorly lit pictures of him that I took with the flash off, because for some stupid reason I thought that if I took flash pictures of old comic books and stuff, then I would be damaging the comics. I don't know where I got that idea, but I don't think that's actually correct. Either that, or I was trying to make sure I didn't get reflected flash light off of the comics that I was trying to take pictures of, because this was probably the first comic book convention I had ever gone to, as many, many years ago. And to see all these old comic books, like the first 6 issues of The Incredible Hulk, you had first few issues of the Fantastic Four and of Spider-Man. I'd never seen such a collection of old comics in one place in my entire life. And at the same time, here's Stan Lee, a creator of so many of those same comics. So one of the things that I've noticed, because I think I've been to 3 different opportunities to ask questions of Stan Lee, and in each of those opportunities, I noticed something that I thought was a little bit tragic at the time, and it was the fact that all of these took place in the time where either Marvel properties were being made into movies or had already been made as movies. And so everybody asked Stan Lee, all of the questions that were directed towards him were about the movies. They were never really about the comic book properties themselves or about his writing on the comic book properties. So every time that I went to one of these things where you had a Stan Lee Q&A, it always seemed like I was the only person who was asking him questions about what he had written. For example, in one of the Amazing Spider-Man storylines that happened later on, much, much later on, I think it was J.M. DeMatteis who introduced the idea that Aunt May had known that Peter Parker was Spider-Man from the beginning. Now, that was something that was not present in any of the Stan Lee Spider-Man issues, and so I just asked him, I said, in a recent issue of Spider-Man, it was revealed that Aunt May knew all along that he was Spider-Man. Is that something that you had in mind while you were writing the comic book? And he just flat out said, no, I thought the stress would have killed her if she'd known that. And then I also got to ask him about the Green Goblin. The Green Goblin, of course, was revealed to be Norman Osborn, but that was not clear. It was not in any way clear that Norman Osborn had any connection with Spider-Man or the Green Goblin in the initial appearances of the Green Goblin. The Green Goblin just kind of appeared out of nowhere and was a mystery character until you had Norman Osborn appear later on, almost seemingly tailored for exactly that reason. So when I got a chance to ask him, I said, well, did you know from the beginning that Norman Osborn was the Green Goblin. He said, I had no clue. We were just making all this stuff up as we went along. I think there was probably a third comic book related question that I asked Stan Lee at some point in time, but I don't remember what it was. I just remember that I was the only person who ever asked him about writing comics. And, when you have this tremendous writer who has written, more comics than any of us ever will in our lifetimes. I mean, he just wrote an insane amount of material, a lot of it through the Marvel method, of course, in which he'd basically give people he'd give a basic idea to a Marvel artist, and then the artist would go through and draw the story and help create and create the characters and etc. And then he'd go and fill in the dialogue afterward. So that was a time-saving way of being able to put out all this different material. But to have that font of comic book writing wisdom and lore and stuff, and not to take advantage of it and just ask about the movies that, unfortunately, by the time that they actually came out on the silver screen, his eyesight had gotten so bad that he couldn't even watch them. He tried, but they were just big blurs to him. So, it's just sad that I feel like there were a lot of wasted questions when it came to asking Stan Lee what it was he thought about, various things. But, he always approached things with good humor. He always approached things with enthusiasm. Spoke almost entirely in hyperbole, almost to the extent that Donald Trump did. So, have I met Stan Lee? The answer is yes, I have. And this is my copy of Amazing Fantasy number 15. And oh, how I wish this were an original copy of Amazing Fantasy 15. So please don't rob my house. This is just a reprint. This is one of the, if you got the Spider-Man Collector's Edition DVD of the Tobey Maguire first movie, it came with a reprint of this, and I got it signed by Stan Lee at that convention, as well as getting my picture taken with him, which you can see somewhat here. This is me in 2007, when I wasn't really any thinner than I am now, and this is Stan Lee, who was a lot haler and healthier than he was in later years. And also, up at the top, I don't know how many people are going to recognize this crew, but this is a partial cast from Stan Lee's show, Who Wants to Be a Superhero? Now, he had a couple of seasons of that show on the Sci-Fi Network, and it was like one of those Survivor-type shows, a reality show where people were competing to be a superhero who would then be featured in a comic book and also in a sci-fi original movie. So you had the winner there, who was Livewire, I think he was called. And then you had, let's take these characters up here again. This was the winner. I believe his character was called Livewire. And then you had, this one I want to say was Major Victory, and he was my series favorite because he was so into character all the time. There was one point at which I just saw him hop down some stairs in a super heroic way, and it just captured my imagination for the rest of the show. The runner-up was Fat Mama, interesting name, but I guess she was just basically looking in the mirror and saying what she saw. And then the last one was actually the first person to be eliminated, who was Nitro G, and I guess he didn't keep his costume after that debacle, so he was just there in a kind of stylized T-shirt. But I tell you what, when I walked in to that particular area of where people were giving signatures, and I have more signatures and photos of people like Ray Park from the Star Wars movie. He played Darth Maul. I also had a picture of Gary Coleman, who was there. I have no freaking idea why he was there at a comic book convention. I think it's just like, hey, I'm a celebrity, let me see if I can make some money on photo ops. Well, he got some from me. But I tell you what, seeing those guys, seeing that group of people after I had just watched that season of Who Wants to Be a Superhero, I literally gasped. I was just like, walking in the room like that. It was so much fun to see them and to get to tell them how much I enjoyed their being on that show. So, Stan Lee was the third creator I have met, which means that the actual comic book creator I have not met is Todd McFarlane. And this is my issue of Spawn. This is my copy of Spawn issue number 16. It's actually the last issue of Spawn that I have because I've basically sold off all of my earlier issues. I followed Todd McFarlane's start on Spawn, and I was both impressed and not impressed. Now, the first two issues of Spawn are freaking amazing. The first issue of Spawn, especially, has such fantastic artwork. It's mind blowing. And then the creation of the Violator character, which is kind of his main enemy in the first arc, makes its appearance in issue number 2, I think. And oh goodness, it was such a great comic for 2 issues. And then for some reason, I think he realized he was going a little bit too far, too fast with his plot. And at the end of issue 2, there's a scene in which the Violator is right about to attack Spawn from behind. And then issue 3 opens with Spawn going like, well, where'd that guy go I was talking to? Because the Violator had been talking to him in human form, and then he decided to just instead melt away into the shadows instead of attacking Spawn. It was a total loss of momentum, and it was something from which I don't think the comic book ever really recovered, at least not for me. Of course, it's a massively successful property. It went on to become the movie with Michael J. White, who played the character, and it went on to become an HBO cartoon that was very popular, and it's got a toy line like you wouldn't believe. I mean, the guy is just an absolute master marketer, and I mean, my goodness, it is so much success for something that ultimately I did not wind up appreciating, largely because he wound up outsourcing so much of his original story to other creators. He wrote maybe the first 5 episodes of Spawn, or the first 5 issues of Spawn, and then after that, it was a series of other writers and artists who contributed. You had like Rob. Well, I don't think Rob Liefeld contributed so much as contributed a character. There was Alan Moore, who I think did number 8. So I think Todd McFarlane actually wrote the first 7 issues, and then Alan Moore did number 8. Neil Gaiman wrote number 9, in which he introduced the character Angela, who then went and traveled over to the Marvel universe and became the sister of Thor and Loki. You had Dave Sim do a very interesting episode of Spawn, which kind of went into the 7th level of hell, which had since been unexplored, but it combined Cerebus and was really a treatise on comic book creators signing away the rights to their creations, and how Dave Sim with his Cerebus character and Todd McFarlane with his Spawn character were never going to do that. With issue 10, I think it was Frank Miller who jumped on board. And I don't know who else got on board from there, but when you had a series that was like all over the map like that, it was very hard to hold my attention. And then there came artistic problems where he started switching out with alternate artists. He had Greg Capullo take over for about 3 issues of Spawn, and those issues I think were also written by Grant Morrison. So now it really wasn't a Todd McFarlane thing. And when Todd McFarlane got back on, his schedule was so jumbled up that he actually wound up releasing issue 18 and then issue 21, and then had to go back and release issue 19 and issue 20. It was just ridiculous. It was a horrible jumble. I think by issue number 25, I was just done with the book. I think I read maybe one other issue of Spawn, which was number 50, because that was an anniversary issue. And at that point, I just gave it up. So Todd McFarlane, of course, just wound up being somebody who I was really not that interested in seeing, and so I never footed the bill to try and get his autograph on anything. And now I've just got the one issue of Spawn that I'm trying to get rid of, and hopefully somebody will want it someday, and I'll be able to sell that for, quarter or something like that. So anyway, I just wanted to let everyone know who had participated in the Twitter poll that it's Todd McFarlane who should have won the Twitter poll, not Gail Simone. And whoever guessed Todd McFarlane, congratulations to you. Other than that, I don't really have that much to say. So do check out my recent videos on comic books. I have one called How Similar is Too Similar in Comics, dealing with a Comicsgate property that I think resembles Witchblade a little too much. And check out my video that it will be first in a series on LGBTQ representation in comic books called The Creeping Rainbow in Comics, the Social Justice League, about an upcoming issue from DC Comics called Dark Crisis, featuring an updated Justice League that has an amazing amount of LGBTQ representation. So check out that comic book fair from me, and do subscribe so that you can check out later fare, and I will talk to you later.